Hi there, everybody. Let's use Illustrator and the mesh tool to draw some fruit. Why not, right? Let's see how this works. So here what you have is an example of an object drawn with the mesh tool. So I've got this apple shape here over here on the side, and you can see it has what you might think of as a realistic looking gradient or painting effect applied to it. Something you might see may look more familiar from Photoshop or something like that, where you get kind of an airbrush appearance. Well, using the mesh tool allows you to create some of those effects on objects, on vector objects. And so the mesh tool is, I'm not going to say easy to use, it's complicated and it has some quirks. So it's not the easiest thing to deal with, but it does create some interesting effects. So let's try it out. So to create something simple like an apple shape, what we're going to do first is start with a circular shape and then kind of mold it into what we want. So I'm going to switch to the ellipse tool and come over here and draw that circle. Here we go. And I'm going to position it over here on the side. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pick kind of the apple color and apply that to it. So I'm going to use my eyedropper and just click on the sample here on the side and get it started. Now, of course, you could use the pen tool or some other drawing tool to make this apple shape. I decided just to use the circle and start there. And what that does for me is it allows me to start with something and then kind of mold it into what I want. So the next thing I'm going to do is use the pen tool to add a few anchor points, like maybe one over on the left, one over on the right, maybe one the bottom left and the bottom right. And then I'm going to use my direct selection arrow to make a little adjustment. So I'm going to lift up this, maybe squish this out a little bit, dip this down. And because I'm drawing an apple, I can get away with a lot of, interpretation, you could say, to the shape, size, and style. And I'm just grabbing anchor points, twisting handlebars as needed, doing what I can to kind of tweak and twist the shape to create that apple appearance. No two apples are alike, so I can get away with a lot of interpretation here. I'm really not trying to make it exactly like the other one, but I do want to mold it a little bit so it's got some dimples and some, irregular edges. I could fiddle with that for a while. I don't want to. I need to move on. All right, so there you go. Just get it to where you want it. First tip to using the mesh tool is to give yourself a base color. You can cause yourself a lot of headaches if you leave your shape empty or you use the wrong color as your base color. In this case, the simplest method is going to be to select a dominant color, like the middle tone for this apple, and then the colors I'm going to add using the mesh tool are either going to be shadows or highlights as I modify it. And so that makes it easier to color as we get down the road, and you'll kind of see what I mean. Also, when using the mesh tool, you want to use it in a limited fashion. For example, you don't want to just click, 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 and just add meshes everywhere. You want to be more deliberate, and you want to do it slower, because the more time and care you spend positioning those lines, the easier they'll be to manipulate when the time is right. So what I like to do is try to hit one right dead center, kind of in the middle, splitting it. And then what I'll do is add one up maybe in the top left, the bottom right. And what that did is it just kind of created a logical grid, split it in half. Now I'm going to pause here for a little bit and decide how to color the object. Doing it in this limited fashion will also help you highlight certain areas and then slowly tweak them or sculpt them. There may be other methods where people just, align hundreds and dozens of these little lines and then try to grab each one. But we're trying to mold this, so I'm not really going to be that deliberate. Another little trick is to use the lasso selection tool. This will allow you to grab more than one anchor point at a time and avoid having to hunt and peck with the direct selection arrow. So what I'm going to do is use that lasso and go ahead and lasso this column of anchor points. So they're all selected. It may not be easy to see on the screen, but they are there and they are selected. And what I can do is switch to that eyedropper and just click in that core shadow area of the apple over here as my sample, and it throws in that color in that range. All right. And I might do a similar thing on the right-hand side of the apple, where what I'll do is I'll lasso this grouping of anchor points, and then I'm going to use that eyedropper again and click on the light side. Now I'm using my existing sample. You may not have that. So as you're drawing, maybe what you can do is just start by selecting a lighter or darker color, or you can click on the color picker from the swatch and just, adjust or lighten your range of colors right there on the surface of your object. In fact, I'm going to stop just using the eyedropper now and just try to do it manually right on the surface. Okay, so if I let go for a second and I'm just observing my sample, what are some things I can do to change this? Well, I probably need to make it darker along the bottom edge. I also need to add some highlights up here, and I need to add the dimple along the top, and maybe even a little bit more of a darker shadow on this side. Okay, now that I've got the massing colors in shape, now it's possible to start adding a couple additional lines to increase the anchor points available. So now is the time when I might come back with the mesh tool, and what I want to do is add some shading here at the bottom of the apple. But I want to confine it to the area in the bottom row of squares, right? So what that would mean is I would need to add a new mesh line here in the bottom row. I'm just going to click once here right on the middle line, so it just adds a simple line like that. Good. Now what that does, it allows me to select this lower area first. So if I select that area like that, and then notice how it has a question mark here? Well, I can now manually create a color. If I double click that and go to the color picker, maybe go with a darker, richer red and click OK. You see how I kind of threw that in there? Now that looks a little bit too uniform. So what I might do is just click this anchor point, for example, and I can double click that. Maybe lighten that range a little bit. It is possible to use your eyedropper on the object itself. So let's say I want to use this color over here. I'll just eyedropper right there. Too bright. Maybe I'll eyedropper over here. So see, you can control where it's going. And because I have that bottom row of anchor points and I just added that mesh right in that in-between area, it confines it and it doesn't disturb some of that other stuff that has already been painted. Okay, how about up here for a highlight? I want to confine that highlight to this right-hand column. Same thing, I'm going to go over here, use that mesh tool and click a point up in that empty space. See how it had white there and it adopted that? Maybe I can do that again. Direct select this anchor point and add a little bit of white there. See how it paints that little corner there? And it's diffused into the edge. And notice how, because it's so close to this area, it forces it to have a harsher edge right there. Now it is possible to use my direct selection tool and move those. You know, if I want to stretch those out a little bit, give them a little more space, a little more breathing room. And maybe I want to make this a color by itself. So I can click on this one, double click color picker, maybe brighten that up somewhere in between white and red. Give it a secondary little color. So this is where you start using, you know, your artistic sense to start adding and subtracting and molding things a little bit. And you can kind of sculpt the color by moving the mesh lines a little more, making them a little more irregular, not quite so geometric. And that tends to give it a little more realism. Okay, how about this dimple along the top of the apple? Now that's going to be done again by creating a harsh edge. So I need to figure out a way to make a oval shape and a little bright spot. And that needs to be confined in a small space so that I get a really tight condensed edge. So I'm going to start with a dark color because I want it to go ahead and throw that dark color in there. So I'm going to just click a dark red. Okay, click on the mesh here. Oh, it lost my color. Oh well. I'm going to go ahead and just add an anchor point right here in the middle. There, it didn't add that color just yet. Let me zoom in, actually, get a little closer look. So not only do I need that color to be confined between this top row, I actually need to be confined in a smaller space. So I'm going to add a couple more mesh lines. And then I'm going to make sure I select the one in the middle. Oh, I should also add one over here on the left and one over here on the right. And you'll see why in a minute. So what I'm trying to target is this one in the middle here. Because that one, if I change to a really dark black or something, notice how all these extra edges around it, these extra anchor points, confine it into that little spot. See that, how it moves that in? And if I adjust one of these and like pinch it, notice how it creates even a harsher edge there. So some areas get spread out and some get pinched. That'll stretch it out and make it feel more like an apple. A little apple dimple. Okay, and if you want like a little bright spot there, click that anchor point, make it a little brighter red. That's a little too bright. See that? So you're starting to sculpt those pieces, and then you just have to kind of mold those anchor points to either make them tighter or more smooth, depending on how close you condense those together. And that's another reason why you start with the broader strokes or the wider areas first, and then you get to the smaller detail as you start to sculpt those pieces. Okay, how about the little stem? Let's do that. I'm going to use the pen tool and just kind of draw a ugly little apple stem here. There we go. Color it brown, dark brown. How about a little leaf shape too? All right, so there you have it. Using the mesh tool, you can add some sculpting color to your objects. Start small, start with the fewer lines, the better. It's going to make that process turn out a little bit better as you work. So don't try to do too much detail all at once. Focus on small areas and sculpt them as you go along. All right, so there you have it. That's how you can use the mesh tool to draw an apple. See you next time.